Okay, everybody, we're going to start this short film real quick.
Full with dust, brown dust. There was the contacts at the top of the circuit.
Yeah.
The metal post in the middle was all gone.
System of lawmaking largely controlled by corporations. Elected officials are often indebted to the private interest groups who fund their campaigns, and at the expense of the public welfare, laws are enacted, favors returned, and advantages conveyed to those private interests. It is high time we put an end to this sanctioned mafia-type government. HB 1481 is a strong move toward leveling the playing field.
Over 500,000 statewide in our elected officials' campaign funds from these chemical companies who don't want to disclose what they're doing, don't want to disclose where their products are located in our food, and fighting transparency and even buffer zones for pesticides spraying around our schools and our homes, suing Hawaii County so they can keep spraying poison next to the schools. And our elected senators are taking money from them, about $200 grand in the Senate and the House.
There's 9% that give an average of about $60 each, the upper 9%. And each one of these BBs equals $600. So I'm going to dump one BB in here, and that represents what 10 of those people contribute. Now, in comparison to that, there's the top 1% of the population, and each one of them gives an average of $3,600, so that would be 6 BBs. And now what I'd like to do is put in the amount of BBs that represents the average contribution of the top 100 corporate contributors. That was 9,000 BBs, the equivalent of over $5 million. Now, who do you think our politicians are listening to? So, I got involved in this issue and started an organization called the Stampede. And what we do is we build the movement to get money out of politics by stamping messages on dollar bills. We are turning money into media. It's economic jujitsu. We're using money to get money out of politics. Free stamps here as door prizes. It's free and take a stamp and got it.
I'd really like to see a bill 1481, possible 1481, or a similar bill passed to help any and local candidates to run for office who are new and not established and not have their own money to run their campaign, and to take some of the influence of money out of politics. And I think that will really help to ensure that politicians are working for their constituents, are making a grassroots community effort, and not just getting support from large donors.
I wrote this song in 2011, and it won't go away. It keeps becoming more and more relevant. You come here, gather around the stage. The time has come for us to voice our rage against the ones who trapped us in a cage, to steal from us the value of our wage, from underneath the vesture of law. The lollies at Washington do not occupied in the offices of you, till you do the bidding of the men without the fear.
All right, guys, thanks so much for coming tonight. Special thanks to Mary Marvin Porter for sharing this video on a rallying clean elections. Thank you, Mary. This happened last spring at the Hawaii Legislature.
Hello everyone, I'm Kiala Coel and this is Adam Green. We are the moderators of tonight's program. Adam and I are members of Hawaii Community College Democracy Matters Club. Democracy Matters is a nationwide, nonpartisan student organization dedicated to promoting clean and transparent elections.
A system of lawmaking
Sorry about
largely
that.
controlled by corporations. Elected officials are often indebted to the private interest groups.
Okay. So I want to introduce tonight's three speakers. First is Sue Durson. Susan Durson moved to Kona from Alaska in 1990. She is past president of Hawaii County League of Women's Voters and is currently a state league legislative liaison. She was part of the team which succeeded in passing the 2% Public Lands Initiative and has been an advocate for public campaign financing for many years. The League of Women's Voters is a nonpartisan organization that works to safeguard democracy through education and advocacy.
And our second speaker is Chris Ewan. Chris Ewan is currently a member of the Board of Land and Natural Resources. He was the planning director for Hawaii County in the Mayor Harry Kim's administration, and he was formerly on the board of Hawaii Elections Project. Chris Ewan will be speaking on transparency, money, and politics, and how we saw the influence of money play out in the last election.
Speaker will be Carmel Lim. Carmel Lim is the Executive Director of Common Cause Hawaii and was previously a board member of the State League of Women Voters of Hawaii. She has successfully advocated for online voter registration, election day registration, and a bill that requires public financial disclosures for members who sit on influential boards and commissions. Common Cause Hawaii is a nonpartisan organization committed to protecting Hawaii's political process and strengthening our democracy.
Okay, so tonight each guest will have a brief presentation. There will be ample time for brief comments and questions after we hear from all three speakers. Sue Durson, you'll be our first speaker. Sue Durson will be speaking on public funding and the history of clean election programs in Hawaii.
Good evening, and thank you for turning out tonight. And a big mahalo to anyone who had anything to do with planning this event. I'm going to give a little background about campaign financing in Hawaii. 40 years ago, there was a program put into practice that was called partial public campaign financing. And the partial part of it means that the state would pay for half of the campaign. The candidate himself or herself had to raise the other half. They first of all agreed to a spending limit, and then they raised that money to qualify for the state funding. That program is still in practice, and in fact, 23 candidates used it in this election. Most notably, David Ige. Ige received $159,000 from the state and raised $159,000 to begin with. So his campaign that included both primary and general had an expenditure of about $320,000. Now, for candidates who have wide name recognition, they have some history, people know who they are, and they may actually have outside, not necessarily PACs, but party support, not in terms of money, but other ways. So the person who is older, has a history in politics, is known, may be able to use the partial funding the way it's set up now. However, younger people who don't have a history, they don't know a lot of people, they certainly don't know people with deep pockets, perhaps, or don't have money themselves, and so it's much more difficult for them to use the partial funding and run a successful campaign. Well, with that in mind, people on the Big Island began to think that another way of funding would be a very good idea. So working over a period of more than 10 years, they came up with comprehensive public funding, which has been certainly used around the country in different locations. And the comprehensive means that the candidate does not have any outside money, does not raise any outside money except for the minuscule contributions that he or she raises in order to qualify for the comprehensive funding. And so in 2008, Act 244 was passed. It had the support of the county council, and it received the approval of the legislature, who passed it over Governor Lingel's veto. So, and it was only with the support of many, many people on the Big Island that that happened, and particularly with young people. That was who put it over the top. It wouldn't have gone through otherwise, because the county council listened to young people, the legislature listened to young people, and the public listened to them. The program itself was a pilot program. It was designed to be in practice for 3 election cycles, 2010, 12, and 14. In order to qualify, the candidate had to, and this was only for county council candidates, the candidate had to go out and get 200 signatures from registered voters in his or her district. And they also had to get $5 along with the signature. Now that doesn't sound too hard, but it was difficult. In the first place, gathering 200 signatures takes a lot more time than you expect. Secondly, candidates found out that in excess of 20% of those signatures were invalidated. Very often the candidate did not, or the signer did not sign his name or her name the way it was on the voter registration forms. They, more importantly, or more commonly, they didn't know their residence address. So many of us live on small little roads that may only recently have a name. We don't know the number. We may rent, and we use post office boxes for our mail. So in any case, many of those signatures were thrown out, and the candidate had to go out and gather more signatures. Often the candidate didn't leave enough time to do that, not expecting that. And so that was definitely a problem. The $5 was also a problem because they couldn't just take a cash, they had to have a check or they had to have a money order. Many people don't have checking accounts these days. So in order to truck on down to the post office or wherever and get a money order and come back and find the candidate, you know, that was asking a lot. So there were those problems. Another problem, probably even greater, came from the way the program was written. You had to have the amounts that were distributed to the various council districts, to candidates, were not the same. They were not equal because the funding was based on what the successful candidates had spent in the last 2 elections in that district. Well, in one district, you might have an incumbent who is well-known, well-liked, maybe didn't have opposition, and
will be speaking on transparency, money and politics, and how we saw the influence of money play out in this last election.
I'm going to stand up so I can get a little bit closer, and maybe we'll have a little talk about this. I was going to talk tonight. Sue has covered some of the issues with the Campaign Spending Commission. What I was going to talk about tonight is some of the trends in money and politics in Hawaii in particular and in the country as a whole, and then try to talk about some of the things we maybe can do about it. I think maybe solutions is a little bit too strong a word right now, but improvements in the systems that we can make. And what we have to realize at the beginning is that when we talk about social problems or we talk about political corruption, we often think that what people are doing, we often think that what is illegal is a problem. Like people are out there breaking the law. The problem, though, in the area of campaign finance is what is legal, not what is illegal. The things that the system lets people get away with now are the source of the problem, and there's really no way around it without changing some of the laws. Some of the existing laws can be better enforced, but there do have to be some changes to try to make the best that we can of a bad situation. And even though I'm going to talk a bit about and focus on Hawaii, we can't avoid the fact that our problems really start in Washington, D.C. And in particular with 5 gentlemen who sit in a big marble building with big columns in the front. That's the majority of the Supreme Court that ruled in Citizens United and in related campaign finance cases. And there's only so far that we can go to try to fix things on a local or even on a national level through legislation, as long as the decisions of the Supreme Court remain the same. Those cases specifically, the Citizens United specifically threw out a portion of federal campaign law, but the principles that it announced had the effect of throwing out provisions in most of the laws of most of the states in the United States concerning elections, including some of our campaign spending laws in Hawaii. So, in a nutshell, where are we in Hawaii? We still validly in Hawaii have limits on what an individual, a corporation, can contribute to a candidate's own committee. All right? So, a candidate is running for office will usually have their campaign committee. Say Billy Kanoy is running for mayor, there'll be a Billy Kanoy for mayor committee, and the candidate will be actively involved in that and solicit money for that. And that's their own committee. And Hawaii, and this is still valid under federal law and under constitutional law, Hawaii has limits on how much anybody can, one person or one company can put into a candidate committee like that. In the case of the governor, it's $6,000 per election period. Now, but there's another kind of committee, and that's called an independent committee, or now the term is the super PAC. And the Supreme Court has basically said that an independent committee can receive unlimited amounts of money from anybody. So in Hawaii, you can give $6,000 to a governor's campaign, but if somebody sets up a committee that's supposedly independent of the governor's campaign, you could give $6 million to it if you happen to have $6 million. And when I say you can give as much as you want, I don't really mean you or me, because we don't have vast amounts of money to throw into political campaigns. The people who are putting money into campaigns, and you'll see this, I go through lists of contributors. You see, if you know who the players are, you see what the economic interests are of the people who donate large sums of money to political campaigns. They have something that they want. They have a business that is going to be affected by the policies of who is elected. So, what makes you independent? Well, the word is you're not supposed to coordinate, and here coordination means you're not supposed to call up the campaign manager of the official committee and find out what kind of ads they want to run and the like. On the federal level, at least, the enforcement of what is coordination is extremely lax. So, to give an example, the campaign chairman for Mitch McConnell stopped being his campaign chairman and went and organized an independent PAC to campaign for him. So, you have these situations, and in fact, at least on the federal level, the candidate can appear at a fundraiser for the independent PAC. So it's the question, the point of independence has almost become meaningless. Now, the Supreme Court accepts the idea that if somebody gives vast amounts of money to a political candidate directly, that can be corrupting, or at least give the appearance of corruption. They understand, I think, they accept at least the common sense notion that people are going to be nice to other people, or politicians are going to be nice to people who give them large amounts of money. Somehow, they don't see the same thing happening if the same person gives a very large amount of money to a, quote, independent committee that is supporting the candidate. But that's a problem we have, and that's a situation we have. So, what's happening in Hawaii, and what showed itself, it started in the 2012 election. In Hawaii, before this decision, there was a limit of $1,000 that any one entity could put into an independent campaign. That Hawaii had to concede had to be thrown out. And so now it's an unlimited amount. So, quite naturally, I think, you see very large amounts of money being raised by supposedly independent political action committees. Just to give a couple of examples. The David Ige campaign for governor eventually raised about $1.5 million. They didn't have much money in the primary, but they raised a fair amount of money for the general. But at the same time, an independent committee put in $1.7 million supporting David Ige in the general election. On the Republican side, Duke Iona raised about $1.3 million. But a supposedly independent super PAC put in $2.2 million to support David Ige, to support Duke Iona. So we have a situation where the gubernatorial campaigns, their own campaigns, did not raise as much money as these super PACs in supporting them. And there were 4 council races, 3 on Maui and 1 on this island, where several super PACs became very active and put about $800,000 in the general election alone in 4 council campaigns. Now, I don't have the figures for how much the council campaigns, I could get this, but I didn't look this up, but I know that the council campaigns were dwarfed by the amounts of money that were put in by these super PACs, which had their own reasons, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So what can we do about this? And really, because the amounts cannot be limited under the current interpretation of the Constitution, the only safeguard we have is disclosure of who the donors are to these super PACs. I think we're all understand that if you know who is paying for these television ads, who is paying for this message and what their motivations are, it gives you a perspective. What should I do?
I don't know how this thing works, but...
I'm staring at everybody here. It gives you a perspective on the motives. And I think we're all used to evaluating a message by who the messenger is. So you have to know who the messenger is and who's behind this. So, like the old Watergate movie, follow the money. But it turns out that although our laws are supposed to mandate disclosure, the way that they've been operating in practice creates holes in the system where it is really difficult to find out who is really contributing the money. So let me give an example, and this will be from the Duke Iona campaign. And actually, I could give almost the same example on the Democratic side. It's a little bit different, but almost the same example. So I'm sure that if you had the misfortune of watching television during the last campaign cycle, you would see these campaign ads, and it would be David E. Gay in kind of black and white or washed out looking with stormy seas behind, and all this threatening music. And at the very end of that ad, you see, if you look carefully, and the law in Hawaii makes you identify in your campaign ad who paid for the ad. You would see who paid for it. And it was American Comeback Committee Hawaii PAC with a Washington, D.C. address. So you want to find out who the donors are to the American Comeback Committee Hawaii PAC. And you look at the information that's filed with the Hawaii Campaign Spending Commission. And it turns out that every penny of the $2.2 million that this PAC received came from
Maybe it's the mic itself.
We can hear you probably.
I'm sorry?
So it doesn't have anything to do with physically where you are in the room. It has
I don't
everything
know.
to do with how close
We could
your
do it.
mouth
We
is
could
to
do
the
an experiment. I'm gonna stand back here for a little bit. Anyway, so okay, American Comeback Committee Hawaii PAC receives $2.2 million from American Comeback Committee, and that's with exactly the same address in Washington, D.C. And that's all the information you're going to get out of the State Campaign Spending Commission's website. That's all they disclose. Now, you can trace this down a little bit more, and it's this one here is not that big a secret. Where this money, this American Comeback Committee is in turn an affiliate of the Republican Governors Association. And the Republican Governors Association, which sounds like maybe something where they go play golf or maybe have little seminars, but is actually an organization that raises a lot of money for Republican gubernatorial candidates. And it does turn out that you can find out who the big contributors are to the Republican Governors Association, except it's filed with the IRS, except you're not going to be able to find out who gave the money just before this election. Maybe in a few months, when the IRS filing comes due, you'll be able to find out where they got their money. But you're not going to be able to find out in this election cycle. So that's one example of a loophole. There's an even bigger group of loopholes in what's called and I hate to get too technical about this, but what's called a 501c4, which is an IRS classification. And it's things like Americans for Prosperity and Crossroads GPS are some of the PACs that operate this way. And under current federal law, you cannot find out who is funding those organizations. That's a black hole. So, and the Democratic Governors Association, to be fair and balanced on this, put the bulk of the money in the PAC that supported David E. Gay that I discussed earlier. And the same issues are true. they, at least in their submittal to the Campaign Spending Commission, identified themselves as the funding group behind the PAC, but you still don't know who the ultimate contributors are from anything that you can find right now. So let me give another example, and this is something that happened in Honolulu in the 2012 mayoral race. A group called Pacific Resource Partnership, which is a PAC, put $3.6 million into defeating Ben Cayetano, who's running for mayor of Honolulu on an anti-rail platform. Pacific Resource Partnership is a consortium of construction labor, of actually the Carpenters Union, and unionized contractors. So if you're a contractor that has a union agreement with the Carpenters Union, you put a certain amount of money for every hour that gets worked into a fund called the Carpenters Market Recovery Fund, or program. Right? This program funded the PAC, and it funded this PAC for $3.6 million in Honolulu in 2012. Now, in Hawaii passed a law about, I don't know now, maybe 8 years ago, and it prohibits people having government contracts from contributing money to political campaigns. I have a line here I'm not supposed to cross. The gentleman is right here. Okay, so you as a contractor, say you are a contractor on the rail project. You cannot contribute money to a political campaign. But I need to kind of use my hands here for a second. So the taxpayer funds the rail project. The rail project has a contract with a contractor who has a contract with the union and puts money into this fund, which then goes into a PAC, which then goes to attack candidates who don't like the rail project. So public money is funding campaigns, political campaigns. We want to have public financing that you don't have to depend on big contributions. There is this backdoor way of money that's going for certain issues because it's really coming out of the taxpayers who are paying for these contracts. So I'm kind of going over time here. So what can we do? Okay, Sue mentioned a couple of things that are really important, and do check off your $3. To have a viable campaign funding system, a public funding system, we have to have funds. And the funds are being, first of all, the number of people who are checking off the $3 has declined over the past 10, 15 years. And so there's less money going in. And then the legislature, by refusing to fund the Campaign Spending Commission the way that the police department gets funded or the Department of Education gets funded, that is like just funded instead of making it come up with money from a special fund, has forced them to drain down the campaign spending, the campaign finance fund in order to pay for the ordinary operations of the people that maintain the website or their staff, their executive director and the like. So we have to do that. And I do think, though, that we need a law that requires the ultimate contributor to disclose the money, to be the one that discloses as the source of the fund. Somewhere, at the end of the day, there's a person, there's a corporation, there's a union that is the source, that is actually the source of this money, not this shell game of one PAC giving money to another PAC, giving money to another organization. So we need to have a law like that. And the final thing this is more of a suggestion to everybody, we need to immunize ourselves against the messages that we get, these paid messages, and we need to view them all with a great deal of skepticism. We need to make sure that our friends and the people we talk to do as well. I do want to end on a little bit of a hopeful note. And I do think that there were some very hopeful signs locally in the last election. And when I say hopeful, I don't mean because I personally was happy necessarily with what side won or who won the election, but there are some examples where big money did not prevail in the last election here. The most dramatic, I think, was in the Maui initiative concerning GMOs, where the anti-GMO initiative won quite narrowly, even though 8 million was put in by the technology companies, biotech companies. Monsanto and Dow Chemical put in $8 million, which was almost $200 for everybody that actually voted in that election. They put a phenomenal amount of money in, and it didn't succeed. The David Ige campaign in the primary was, I don't know the exact figures, outspent by 5 to 10 times by Governor Abercrombie, and won quite emphatically. In these council races that I mentioned, where there was $800,000 put into 4 council races, three of the 4 council members who were supported by the big money PACs lost, including the council member who was opposing Margaret Willey here in Kohala. So these are all examples that big money doesn't necessarily triumph. You know, nationally, 94% of the people with the candidates with more money in the House of Representatives won, and 83% of the people running for Senate with more money won. So there's some, it helps to have money, but it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily win. And I think maybe people are getting more skeptical, and maybe they're being more cautious about the kinds of messages, and they're maybe immunizing themselves to the kind of repeated, drumbeat of constant ads that big money does buy for you. And I think it does suggest some hope for a public funding system that if the public funding can at least supply enough money for the candidate to get their name out, be competitive. They don't necessarily have to match their opponent dollar for dollar to win a race. So there's some hope. There's a lot we need to do, and we can talk further about stuff that will come up in the current legislature. And I know Camille will be talking a lot about that when she comes on in a minute.
Thanks, Chris. Well said. Carmel Lim is going to speak next on potential political funding transparency bills in the next coming legislation.
Thank you.
You bet.
I'd actually like to interrupt this program to acknowledge the class that Noelle teaches, the community development class. I've heard a couple times that young people should continue to work on this, and I want to acknowledge that these young people have planned this event from start to finish, and I think that's amazing, so thank you. So I'd like to piggyback off of what my colleague said. There is a trend in an increasing amount of money spent in our elections, and there's also pushback. So before I get into that, can anyone guess how much money was spent in our elections this cycle? All in all? Nationally and locally together. So let's start at this. Is it about 500 million higher? Raise your hand. Higher? Is it 1 billion? Higher. 3 billion?
3 billion.
We are at 5 billion. Our 2014, the cost of our 2014 election was $5 billion. $4 billion of that was spent on federal races and nearly $1 billion was on state races. In Hawaii alone, as Chris mentioned, we had $15 million super PAC money spent in our election.
I mean, even though I've been married 50 years, that I still get
Maybe I'll come visit tomorrow night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I fixed my car. I was checking the wires.
Okay, everybody, we're going to start this short film real quick.
Full with dust, brown dust. There was the contacts at the top of the circuit.
Yeah.
The metal post in the middle was all gone.
System of lawmaking largely controlled by corporations. Elected officials are often indebted to the private interest groups who fund their campaigns, and at the expense of the public welfare, laws are enacted, favors returned, and advantages conveyed to those private interests. It is high time we put an end to this sanctioned mafia-type government. HB 1481 is a strong move toward leveling the playing field.
Over $500,000 statewide in our elected officials' campaign funds from these chemical companies who don't want to disclose what they're doing, don't want to disclose where their products are located in our food, and are fighting transparency and even buffer zones for pesticides spraying around our schools and our homes, suing Hawaii County so they can keep spraying poison back to the schools. And our legislators are taking money from them, about $200,000 in the Senate and the House.
There's 9% that give an average of about $60 each, the upper 9%. And each one of these BBs equals $600. So I'm going to dump one BB in here, and that represents what 10 of those people contribute. Now, in comparison to that, there's the top 1% of the population. And each one of them gives an average of $3,600. So that would be 6 BBs. And now what I'd like to do is put in the amount of BBs that represents the average contribution of the top 100 corporate contributors. That was 9,000 BBs, the equivalent of over $5 million. Now, who do you think our politicians are listening to? So, I got involved in this issue and started an organization called the Stampede. And what we do is we build the movement to get money out of politics by stamping messages on dollar bills. We are turning money into media. It's economic jujitsu. We're using money to get money out of politics. Free stamps here as door prizes. Don't forget your free anti-tax stamping guide.
I'd really like to see a bill 1481, possible 1481, or a similar bill passed to help Indian candidates run for office new and are established and not have their own money to run their campaign and to take some of the influence of money out of politics. And I think that will really help to ensure
2011, and it won't go away. It keeps becoming more and more relevant. You come here, got around the stage. The time has come for us to voice our rage against the ones who trapped us in a cage, to steal from us the value of our wage, from underneath the vesture of law. The lollies at Washington do not at liberty, the bureaucrats could fall. Until they are purged, we won't withdraw. We'll occupy the streets, we'll occupy the courts, we'll occupy the offices of you, till you do the bidding of the men without the few.
Thanks so much for coming tonight. Special thanks to Mary Marvin Porter for sharing this video on a rally and clean elections. Thank you, Mary. This happened last spring at the Hawaii Legislature.
Hello everyone, I'm Kiala Coel and this is Adam Green. We are the moderators of tonight's program. Adam and I are members of Hawaii Community College Democracy Matters Club. Democracy Matters is a nationwide, nonpartisan student organization dedicated to promoting clean and transparent elections.
A system of lawmaking largely controlled by corporations. Elected officials are often indebted to the private interest groups.
Okay. Okay. So I want to introduce tonight's three speakers. First is Sue Durson. Susan Durson moved to Kona from Alaska in 1990. She is past president of Hawaii County League of Women's Voters and is currently a state league legislative liaison. She was part of the team which succeeded in passing the 2% Public Lands Initiative and has been an advocate for public campaign financing for many years. The League of Women's Voters is a nonpartisan organization that works to safeguard democracy through education and advocacy.
And our second speaker is Chris Ewan. Chris Ewan is currently a member of the Board of Land and Natural Resources. He was the planning director for Hawaii County in the Mayor Harry Kim's administration, and he was formerly on the board of Hawaii Elections Project. Chris Ewan will be speaking on transparency, money, and politics, and how we saw the influence of money play out in the last election.
Speaker will be Carmel Lim. Carmel Lim is the Executive Director of Common Cause Hawaii and was previously a board member of the State League of Women Voters of Hawaii. She has successfully advocated for online voter registration, election day registration, and a bill that requires public financial disclosures for members who sit on influential boards and commissions. Common Cause Hawaii is a nonpartisan organization committed to protecting Hawaii's political process and strengthening our democracy.
Okay, so tonight each guest will have a brief presentation. There will be ample time for brief comments and questions after we hear from all three speakers. Sue Durson, you'll be our first speaker. Sue Durson will be speaking on public funding and the history of clean election programs in Hawaii.
Good evening, and thank you for turning out tonight. And a big mahalo to anyone who had anything to do with planning this event. I'm going to give a little background about campaign financing in Hawaii. 40 years ago, there was a program put into practice that was called partial public campaign financing. And the partial part of it means that the state would pay for half of the campaign. With the candidate himself or herself had to raise the other half. They first of all agreed to a spending limit, and then they raised that money to qualify for the state funding. That program is still in practice, and in fact, 23 candidates used it in this election. Most notably, David Ige. Ige received $159,000 from the state and raised $159,000 to begin with. So his campaign that included both primary and general had an expenditure of about $320,000. Now, for candidates who have wide name recognition, they have some history, people know who they are, and they may actually have outside, not necessarily PACs, but party support, not in terms of money, but other ways. So the person who is older, has a history in politics, is known, may be able to use the partial funding the way it's set up now. However, younger people who don't have a history, they don't know a lot of people, they certainly don't know people with deep pockets, perhaps, or don't have money themselves, and so it's much more difficult for them to use the partial funding and run a successful campaign. Well, with that in mind, people on the Big Island began to think that another way of funding would be a very good idea. So working over a period of more than 10 years, they came up with comprehensive public funding, which has been certainly used around the country in different locations. And the comprehensive means that the candidate does not have any outside money, does not raise any outside money except for the minuscule contributions that he or she raises in order to qualify for the comprehensive funding. And so in 2008, Act 244 was passed. It had the support of the county council, and it received the approval of the legislature, who passed it over Governor Lingel's veto. So, and it was only with the support of many, many people on the Big Island that happened, and particularly with young people. That was who put it over the top. It wouldn't have gone through otherwise, because the county council listened to young people, the legislature listened to young people, and the public listened to them. The program itself was a pilot program. It was designed to be in practice for 3 election cycles, 2010, 12, and 14. In order to qualify, the candidate had to, and this was only for county council candidates, the candidate had to go out and get 200 signatures from registered voters in his or her district. And they also had to get $5 along with the signature. Now that doesn't sound too hard, but it was difficult. In the first place, gathering 200 signatures takes a lot more time than you expect. Secondly, candidates found out that in excess of 20% of those signatures were invalidated. Very often the candidate did not, or the signer did not sign his name or her name the way it was on the voter registration forms. They, more importantly or more commonly, they didn't know their residence address. So many of us live on small little roads that may only recently have a name. We don't know the number. We may rent, and we use post office boxes for our mail. So in any case, many of those signatures were thrown out, and the candidate had to go out and gather more signatures. Often the candidate didn't leave enough time to do that, not expecting that. And so that was definitely a problem. The $5 was also a problem because they couldn't just take a check, cash. They had to have a check or they had to have a money order. Many people don't have checking accounts these days. So in order to truck on down to the post office or wherever and get a money order and come back and find the candidate, that was asking a lot. So there were those problems. Another problem, probably even greater, came from the way the program was written. You had to have the amounts that were distributed to the various council districts, to candidates, were not the same. They were not equal because the funding was based on what the successful candidates had spent in the last 2 elections in that district. Well, in one district, you might have an incumbent who is well-known, well-liked, maybe didn't have opposition, and didn't have to spend much money. In another district, a candidate may have taken buku amounts of outside money and spent that money. So the variation was sometimes as much as 3 or 4 times what one candidate would get in another district. So that was widely seen as being inequitable. But those things, they could have been tweaked, but the nail in the coffin came when the Campaign Spending Commission, the Elections Commission, said they didn't have the $350,000 that was required by law to cover the possible requests from candidates. They had $300,000, but they didn't have $350,000, and the legislature would not put the extra money into the account. So the program ended very abruptly after 2 election cycles rather than 3. It was, of course, a pilot project, but the facts gathered, the experience, what was learned would have been better, surely, with 3 election cycles rather than 2. So there we are. It came and went, but it was a success, and it definitely was a success. Incumbents liked it because they didn't have to go out and raise money. They could talk to their constituents as they were gathering signatures. The newbies really liked it because it was an entree into the political arena, which they may not have otherwise been able to do. They didn't have the money and they didn't have the contacts. And finally, the public loved it because what they saw was that somebody who was elected with comprehensive public funding didn't owe anything to anybody. That was the basis of public trust. So here we are now, and we have to figure out how to go ahead. There are a lot of ways we can go. A lot of things maybe we need to do. Of course, we need to try, you know, to overturn the Citizens United decision, but, you know, that's a long ways from us, but we can help. We need, there are people who think we should try to reinstate the county council project. In fact, I had a council person get in touch with me this week and say that while she hadn't been on the council while the program was in effect, she knew very well what the benefits were, and she would be more than willing to work to help put this back in place if that were the decision about a direction that should be taken. I feel we need to look at funding for the Campaign Spending Commission. They have done an absolutely wonderful job in terms of encouraging transparency, helping people who are running to do the right things, and they are seriously underfunded. Some years ago, there were basically two funds. One to cover the cost of the campaigns for candidates, the public funding. And that was, the money came into that fund from the checkoff on the income tax forms, the $3 checkoff. So many people don't realize that that's not going to increase your taxes by $3. It's going to take $3 from the general fund and direct it to the Campaign Spending Commission. But during the economic downturn, the Campaign Spending Commission was directed to take their administrative costs out of that fund. So that administrative fund was not underwritten by the legislature anymore. It is now depleting the fund drastically. So somehow we have to work to begin to encourage more people to do the checkoff. 60,000 people did it this year in 2014. But we could get lots more people to do that. But probably even better, and along with that, is to encourage the legislature to fund the Campaign Spending Commission adequately. So there we are. There's a lot to do. I hope all of you will hang in there and work very hard, and especially you young people, just realize that very good things can come out of your determination, your perseverance. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Our next speaker will be Chris Ewan. Chris.
And super PACs can spend as much or as little as they want. In the gubernatorial race, they spent $5 million roughly. And in the CD2 race, they spent $486, not 86,000, $486. So they can be flexible. I mentioned a pattern. Chris mentioned that there was a shining ray of hope in the Maui ballot where Monsanto and company lost. There is a pattern of that. In Oregon, they faced similar. If some of you heard, their GMO labeling initiative also failed. That was their most expensive race in their state history, and that cost $28 million. The two major funders in that race was Monsanto and DuPont. So we do see a trend, and we do see people pushing back. So that's really what my area of focus is in this program. What can we do to reduce the influence of money, special interest money in our elections. And many of the topics that I was going to propose, or I am proposing, have already been mentioned. There are 3 things. We can revamp our existing partial public funding program. We can make sure that we reinfuse the money in our existing election fund so that we can support a robust program. And we do need to strengthen the disclosure and transparency for our super PACs. So why revamp partial public funding? Why not focus on pushing a full-fledged public funding program? That's what we've been trying to do for the past 10 or so years, and frankly, we've been beating ourselves up for something that's not going to move forward because we haven't been looking at reinfusing money into the fund simultaneously. So we are taking a step back. We want to take baby steps to make sure that the program that we do have is viable and attractive to candidates. So what does that entail? It really needs looking at including the cost of living and inflation in the formula that's used for that program. When the program was created in the last CON, that was not taken into account. So we're facing an increasingly obsolete program. We'd also like to look at revisiting the matching amount. Depending on the race you are running, you can be awarded 10 to 15% of the money raised. And we also need to find ways to make the program itself more appealing. What can we add on to the existing program to make candidates want to pursue that further? Sue mentioned reinfusing money into the fund, and I would like to elaborate a little more. I'd like to give a little more background on that. So until 1999, the general operating expenses for Campaign Spending Commission was coming out of the general fund and not out of the fund meant to support clean elections. Right now, we are looking at $2.5 million in that fund. Excuse me, that was as of June. So after this election cycle, David Ige took out about $105,000, and we have other candidates who took out money from that. So if we project ahead, that fund may not be around in the next decade. Chris mentioned the $3 checkoff. How many of you check that off when you file your taxes? Thank you. We have learned that a lot of programs like TurboTax automatically default to a no check for that. And a lot of that is because there is little education and understanding around that program. So when you check off the $3 checkbox when you're filing your taxes, you are essentially saying, I support $3 of the general fund to go into the clean election fund, essentially. And many people also don't remember or don't know that that $3 does not reduce your own income return. So I think that's very important. So if you come out of here with one thing today, please ask a friend to check that $3 off and remind them that it does not affect their income tax return. Another thing that had affected the dwindling funds is that in 2009, the fines that supported the Campaign Spending Commission were removed. So about $17,000 annually went into this fund from fines from, say, candidates who filed reports late and things of that nature. But because of a perceived conflict of interest, right? You have an agency regulating this. They could make the case that you are looking for people just to support yourself. So we'd like to visit different ways or different fines that we could use to funnel money into that. I believe it's Connecticut, for example, that uses a sheets. It's sheets. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. SG. Can I pull the English as my second language at this point? But the point is they have unrelated funds that they have identified that they could go into their own fund. Anyway, what you had invited me to talk about was in the 2015 elections. I wanted to give you a preview, by the way. The first two is a preview on what we're looking at in pursuing clean elections. What I'd like to kind of segue into now is the transparency aspect of what we can look for in this coming legislative session. So, okay, I digress. First, I'm going to talk about what we did pass, because what you had mentioned was important. So, in 2013, we passed a bill that would require super PACs to list their top 3 donors in ads. So that's important to know. That'll be in effect, or we'll see that happen in the 2016 election. And in addition to that, the super PACs would also be required to list their stakeholders and or the board of directors when they file reports with the Campaign Spending Commission. Okay, now back to 2015. So there are different bills that we're looking forward to. We've met with various legislators already and various coalition partners. Right now, the first bill I'd like to talk about is require more timely disclosures for PACs. How many of you have tried to find information on super PACs that have been trying to influence our election and haven't found what you needed to find in a timely way? Yeah, so right now, these folks have to file their last report October 27, but that filing requirement only requires them to identify money spent until October 20th. So you have this 7-day gap that we saw a surge of money come in, but no reporting done. So what certain legislators are looking at is requiring an earlier filing done in October and to fill that 7-day gap. So that way we know who is trying to influence our elections early on and also at the very end. So we don't have to wait until January and it's longer to find out who is active then. Another bill that's being looked at and drafted in the House by certain House leadership is a shareholder bill. So what this essentially would require is for corporations and essentially independent committees to ask their members or their shareholders, their stakeholders to vote on an independent expenditure. And in order to make that donation, they would need majority vote. So I think that's something that would be very interesting to watch, and it's something that we've seen pass in other states and has been effective. And another thing, the last thing that we have identified so far anyway, is requiring late non-candidate committee filers to be publicized, essentially, to be listed on the Campaign Spending Commission's website. So right now, the Campaign Spending Commission only lists candidates who have filed late or who have not filed. They do not list non-candidate committees, essentially super PACs. They don't list those online. So if folks filed late, we wouldn't know by visiting the website. We'd have to call them. And as you may know, with dealing with different offices, that could take a while for them to get back, depending on how busy they are. So the reason why it's not required is because they hadn't thought this would be a problem. When they passed a law that would ask for candidates to be listed on the website, it was a pre-Citizens United era. And frankly, we just need to get with the times. So these are some initial ideas that we have learned or we're working on, and we would certainly be interested in hearing from you and what ideas you have to possibly strengthen the existing partial public funding program or to strengthen the level of disclosures for super PACs. And where is the moderator?
Wow, thank you very much, and thanks to all 3 of our speakers once again. Fantastic. So now we're going to open up for questions and comments. So hand the mic over to you guys again. Share this. Do you want to hand it? Are you guys on the mic?
I should recognize.
Okay.
I think you call it out and then you recognize them.
Absolutely.
So my name is Michael Burnside. You asked for some positive comments that might be helpful. So I only have two in the back of my mind at the moment. One of which is you keep reiterating that this $3 checkoff doesn't actually cost us any money. But it seems to be not common knowledge that this is the case. So I don't know the wording that's actually on the state form because I'm so poor I don't file taxes. But you may want to explicitly say that this checkoff will not change or alter the amount of money you have to pay or receive. I don't know how many words you're allowed in this bureaucratic form, but you may want to change the wording so that people know that it's not costing them any money or what it is doing. Because if they don't know, then education efforts are going to be small and thin. The other thing is, money buys everything in a capitalistic society. That's what it does. It's the medium of exchange. But there are competing medium of exchanges, one of which is licensing. You have all these people who are putting the ads in our television sets because they've been paid by the tax. These people suffer licensing agreements with federal regulators and all the rest to use the airwaves and everything else. So you could, in theory, say that if you spend this much time on political ads in the course of a campaign, you must spend that much time in educational efforts. Is a licensing requirement for you to be a broadcasting company. And the other thing is, since capitalism does encourage us to use money as a medium of exchange, is some form of unbalanced taxing. And this gets really complicated, and I don't know how to implement it. But if you spend less than $1 million, we'll only tax you at 1%. If you spend between $1 million and $5 million, we'll tax you at 5%. If you spend more than $5 million in one of our campaigns, we're going to pay you 25%.
Just on one issue there, I do believe that there are European countries that require their broadcasters to give free time to candidates, and I believe that could be done federally. I don't hold your breath with the current climate, but they could. Although the broadcasters are licensed by the federal government, they do have requirements of providing public service. And they could be made to give free time to campaigns, all campaigns, and this would serve to let people get their message out without spending a huge amount of money.
I would like to suggest, as some of you know, what we need is a constitutional amendment that would get rid of Citizens United. I have here a map of states that have already proposed legislation to defeat Citizens United. Hawaii is one of them that has put a resolution in our state legislature to amend the Constitution so that the Citizens United would be defeated. So that's kind of the way to go.
Thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for bringing that up. So, is this on? Oh, hello.
There we go.
So, in 2012, our state legislature unanimously passed a resolution to urge our congressional delegates to support overturning Citizens United. And I also want to give a shout out to Hawaii County and Honolulu County for also doing the same. I think what we face right now is making sure that stays on the forefront of our congressional representatives with competing issues, military, education, economy. It's something that can slip to the back, and it's up to us to really, and you know this, to really make sure it's at the forefront. And frankly, I'm really proud that I'm here with you. You recognize that this is a long-term investment and a long-term effort. Any reform, whether that's the civil rights movement, women's suffrage, it's going to take some time. And this was the first step. At least our counties and our state recognize that. So again, it's up to us to continue to push our congressional delegates to make sure this stays at the forefront and that they are proactive in supporting overturning Citizens United.
Okay. Right?
Yep. Hi, I'm Ryan. So there's a newly created club at HCC, and we're working on it for UHH side for Democracy Matters, and it's something that supporting
the push for clean elections is something we're going to be looking forward to taking on in the spring. And I was wondering in terms of how to kind of collaborate with what's moving forward, you know, over the maybe next half year, how we can, you know, have students be involved in that process and help and support. For me, I'm thinking hundreds, if not thousands, of signatures from students, and it's quite possible. And so how can we work together is what I'm wondering.
So Common Cause is working with other organizations like the League and other community groups. So I think what we can do is at least set up, you know, conference calls to make sure we are on the same page and moving forward together. We are actually meeting with a couple legislators next month. So what we can also do is make sure we stay on the same email chain, at least for the people who are organizing, and then we can leave it up to you to organize your folks however way you want. I can give you my contact afterward, or I can tell you now. It's CLIM as in Mary at commoncause.org. On our Common Cause page, there's also a sign-up sheet to identify if you are interested in participating in clean election work. So there are a variety of things we can do, but working across the islands, across the state is something that we would like to look at doing. So thank you for stepping up and offering that.
And I think also that people on this island, I mean, we would like very much to stay in touch and to be part of what you would see as going forward. Together, it seems to me that we can probably lay out a plan and work at it.
Right. You, sir?
Yeah, I do want to commend the speakers as well. Global Hope with, you know, push this clean election thing, and the good job of exposing how corporate money is really influencing, you know, the election a lot. But I also want to share that that's not the only reason, that's not the only aspect that corporate money is so decisive. It controls the media so much that 90% of the stuff we get are propaganda. Now, I'll just give you one example. How many people from mainstream media have heard about that UN vote about 3 weeks ago, where there was a vote of 188 to 2? Anybody heard about that? No, you didn't. Okay, it's because for 23 years, the U.S. has been outvoted 100 to 1, but in this case 2. The illegal embargo on Cuba, 188 to 2 out of the world body. Now, I would even venture to guess if Islamic State was on the ballot, they might even get more than that. But who hears about it? Because corporate media doesn't want us to know. That's how powerful corporate money is. So we need to, you know, not only work on this, you know, but that's a big battle. I mean, I know that, you know, so, but just one very good example.
Thank you.
Sir?
I spent a lot of time, you know, overseas working on, you know, projects for many, many years. And one of the things that I found is that how free and fair elections are is really dependent on how free and open the society is in general. So what I would say is if you really are interested in free and fair and clean elections, you have to focus on, let's say, the low-hanging fruit in other parts of the society. And when you see a problem, like in Hawaii here, there's a major problem with legislators, people with influence that pretend that they don't know what a conflict of interest is. And this county, this state is just riven with conflict of interest. in the university system too. That's why they have all these problems with, trying to hire and maintain senior administrators. But I'll give you an example right here in Hawaii County. For the past few years, the mayor has tried to pass an ethics bill. Ethics in government is important, especially in contracting, okay? And the mayor was unable to get his latest ethics bill through. And some of the council members, and even some of the members of the ethics board, said, well, we can't do that because, I mean, we're all related. You know, we're all related. But the U.S. Census says that Hawaii is, I think, about the most ethnically diverse state in the United States. So we can't all be related. So in this county, a family member, a spouse or a brother, can basically, submit a bid to where his relative is working and be awarded that bid. Now the problem with something like that is, why would a good contractor want to compete against a family member of someone in the county where they're trying to get a contract? Now, these are just examples that if you really want clean elections, when you see these kinds of things in the newspaper, okay, about what's going on that you don't like, and you know that it's either unfair or it's corrupt, you have to do something about it. Because the corruption goes across the entire system. It's not just elections.
I just wanted to say that, the original fund had $5 million in it, and it had a threshold of $3.5 million, that after that it would not kick in anymore for our island. And what I kept understanding is, like, why did they put the Campaign Spending Commission income for it from that fund? And my answer to that is that we have hidden enemies in the legislature. And as I say, they really are hidden. But there's also, we have hidden friends. And one of the friends I want to acknowledge is Russell Ruderman. Because I'll never forget that, I took the petition to you, and you put one of your workers that you're paying hourly wages for at the front door with the petition, and you did it even in the Kona store. And I just hope that you can be our hero in the legislature this spring and really bring these issues to the tables that they need to go. Thank you for...
Since the senator is here, and my name is Gregor Ilagan, and I'm a council member for Hawaii County. And I just wanted to let everybody know that the reason why I became an elected official is because of clean elections. No one knew anything about me, and I went out and asked $5 from each individual, registered voters in my district, and I could not get cash. I could only get checks, money order. And I just want to say I'm very thankful for this program. And it's unfortunate that it didn't meet that threshold in 2014 because it was supposed to be going on its third pilot program. Now, the reason why I spoke up is because we have a distinguished panelist here. And I would like to get your input on how we may increase voter turnout.
And I want to recognize Gregor as as an example of a candidate that was not that was not one of the whole boy network, that was able to use this program to get started in politics. And in 2010, there were a couple of examples of that, and then in 2012, considerably more people used it. And had the program been able to run in the County Council in 2014, I think we would have seen very strong participation by across the board with a lot of the candidates. It was becoming a very popular program. It was a successful program in the sense that both it became popular with the candidates and they were able to be elected on the program. You know, it wasn't like, oh, well, we'll be the good guys and not take you know, big money and then we're going to get smashed. It actually did provide money that people, enough money for people to run on. I think these things, you know, on the turnout, I think part of it is I think the lack of competitive races is part of the low turnout, and that if you followed, I mean, I can understand. You know, there are very few competitive races in Hawaii. If you look at the state legislature, I think there's something like 51 House races. There are 51 House races, okay? Some of them don't even go to the general because there's only one candidate and it doesn't even appear on the general. I think there were maybe 4 or 5 that were within 10% the vote in the general election. So this goes with this whole funding situation is that virtually almost all the incumbents win. You have to really mess up. You have to, you have to make people mad at you. And so incumbents under the current system are greatly, they have a lot of advantage in raising money. A lot of people give money to who they think is going to win because they want to be on their good side, and they don't want to back somebody that might lose. And so you get this entrenchment of incumbents. And I'm not against all the incumbents. Some of them I like and some of them are good, but they do have this huge advantage under the current system. And I think it does lead to a lack of competition, and then this leads to people feeling like, yeah, why am I going to vote? Because you know, it's really, there's not anybody that really has a chance. I'm not going to excuse people that, you know, don't vote, but I do think there's a part of that.
And I'm not so sure, Gregor, that I agree with this, but what would you think about the plan that a place in Maryland has instituted where they are having a lottery for people who vote? And I think the prize was $25,000.
It's a great idea.
I would like to piggyback on what Chris has said, because that's something that our team has been talking about quite frequently, and we've come to the same conclusions as well. We do think that we need to make our elections more competitive, and we need to make our legislative body more diverse. So, not scientifically, but just from what we've observed on the ground, we see a lot of people saying, why should I vote? Incumbents will win anyway. Or why should I vote? Democrats will win anyway. That's something we hear across the board, whether you're a Republican or Democrat. It goes both ways. So it's, I think, disheartening for voters to see 80% of the state legislature as incumbents, and a lot of them of certain age. I say that in the best way possible. But no, really, we have 22 women in state office. We have 14 people under age 45. We have 6 Filipinos, roughly, and I think it's very concerning that in Hawaii, we only have now 5 legislators of Hawaiian descent. So what does that tell the average voter? I think what we can do, again, is make our elections more competitive and diversify and expand the pool of candidates. So a couple of things that we're looking at in the next session. One is instant runoff voting. So how many of you are familiar with that system? Okay, so it's a program that is common in, I believe, North Carolina, and in many counties in Colorado, Vermont, Washington, California. So it's essentially a preferential system, a ranking system. So instead of voting for just one candidate, you rank your favorite candidates, and then those candidates move on. So that way it gives people who are new, people who are the unlikely candidate, it gives them a chance to move forward. Because right now, how many of you talk to people and they say, I voted for so-and-so because the other person who I really wanted to win has no chance anyway. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. So instant runoff voting is a solution to that, or an improvement to that. Another thing that we've heard a couple legislators talk about is a write-in voting system, where essentially you're at the poll, or you're voting naked at home, whichever you prefer, but you look at the ballot, and you see the name of the pre-printed names, and you're not satisfied with that. Instead of turning the voters away or asking them to just leave it blank, it's a productive way for the voter to suggest a name for a candidate they feel is viable and competent and compelling. So those are two ideas that are floating around at the Capitol right now, and we hope to see.
None of the above.
That's also an idea floating around at the Capitol.
Justin, I said your hand, sir.
Yeah, so Gregor, I think you answered the question of what you were saying in that you ran and won with clean elections. That program has been demonstrated to greatly increase voter turnout, because what happens is you get a much more diverse group of candidates, and you have much more voter participation. Okay? So how do we do that? Right? We've done it before for 3 different campaign cycles successfully. Example right here. And I think at one point in time it was like the majority of the council people who won had run using that program. So let's bring that back. I'm surprised. That's why we were here, actually, was to discuss clean elections and how to make that happen. We made it happen once before. It started quite literally in this room. So why don't we do it again? What's going on, and this is a question to the panel, what's going on with, what's the organization, Democracy, or Voter-Owned Hawaii? What's going on with those guys? Because they're the ones who spearhead it in conjunction with the young folks here, students here, and Noelle and cool politicians like Senator Ruderman and Councilman Milligan. And what kind of bill are we going to introduce? Who's introducing the bill? What does the bill look like? We've done it before. Are we doing it again? Or are we just going to have all this intellectual mumbo jumbo and distract us from the focus, which is we've done this successfully before, let's do it again and increase voter turnout?
And I think that's something I can summarize again. We're looking at revamping the existing program because it has been antiquated, and because the lack of funding has been the roadblock to establish a full public funding program. So again, we're looking at revisiting and seeing how we can improve the existing program before we could move forward with a full public funding program. And to speak, I can't speak for Voter-Owned Hawaii, but I'm not sure how active they will be in the coming session. So right now, Common Cause is working with legislative leaders to pick up the ball and move it forward. And when Voter-Owned Hawaii is ready, we'll be there with them.
So a segue to your question is, have you drafted a preliminary bill to any of the legislators? I mean, it's November, end of November, and you know how they get the ground running very fast. So what do you have packaged to propose?
So what we have is a very rough draft that we are looking at with Campaign Spending Commission, and we're meeting with the appropriate legislative leaders in December, early December, when they come back from wherever they are.
Are you doing it in both houses?
Yes, of course.
So, sort of a bitter statement, don't take it personally. Once upon a time, I was an idealist, right? But I've learned that if you want to motivate people, you can be an idealist and dedicate your life to it, or you can look at what society is today and see what sticks and carrots work now. And today we live in a capitalistic system. People are taught from birth to respond to money. So if you really want people to participate in elections, quite frankly, you pay them. And one way you do that is with cash. You give them $100 off their state income tax if they vote. And a different way you do that, you give them time. You make election day a holiday, so they don't have to go to work, just like the 4th of July, you make it patriotic. You take what people are today, you see what's worked to motivate them in their economic lives. You realize that their economic lives are a majority of their life. And you try to put voting into that pattern somehow that's least in my effort.
Or you could be like other countries and put them in jail if they don't vote.
There you go. Mostly voting. Nobody wants to be in jail for that.
I understand that in Australia they have mandated voting.
Yes.
And if you don't vote, they fine you about $50. That would be a little motivation. We're supposedly living in a democracy. And so it's part of the responsibility of citizenship to vote.
All the more reason to put non-votes on the ballot, seriously. It'd be possible to vote, you could register your disapproval of the current system without committing to somebody that you don't know.
You in the back, sir.
Yeah, in Philadelphia where I came from, they do have the button at the bottom of the machine that says no, a no vote. So you can vote no to everything. So that's interesting. But the other thing is that we're sitting in a university, and civics is not something they really teach. And that's another direction we have to go. I mean, we can advocate for clean elections and then get co-opted, because as soon as I find out that, they can get away with the government paying for the election, I say, fine, then we'll find another way to make it, because money does talk, and people who have money are getting fewer and fewer and fewer, more and more money. But education and making it a priority to take ideas from people about civics and apply them is very important, and I think that that's another part of the advocacy that needs to happen. We need to believe that we're smart enough to govern ourselves, and that's the quote-unquote idea of America, right? But we don't study it. There's no classes where they teach that, or there are a few, but it's a very, very low priority thing. It's not like what everybody wants to take at in their freshman year. Or even kindergarten through 12th grade. I mean, this is something that needs to be a priority in our society, and we need to advocate for it. And we need to occupy our educational system. And this is a good reason to do it. And we'll have more candidates like this because they've come up learning and teaching.
I kind of want to go back to that idea that they're talking about the importance of actually educating the taxpayers on how it all works to, for the money to go to the clean elections. And I mean, so much now is in social media and stuff, so I just wonder if there's, I'm not particularly talented that way, but if someone could create something and then we could all really work together to get that message out in that way and in other ways, because, it's kind of small and it's kind of concrete, but to me, I just think that we don't know that. And I think that would make something small that we can do.
And social media is one way that, there's a lot of that today, a lot more than there was a few years ago. So
think that's deeply important.
Friend of friends.
Did any of our candidates use the social media in their campaigns?
Oh, sure.
Here in Hawaii?
Every single one, probably.
But
Yes.
Ruth, the idea is that people will talk among themselves through the social media, but they need the accurate message to send out.
Yeah, there's a voting system that I've always wanted to see. I think it would work well, but I've never heard it discussed anywhere. And I call it the negative vote. Let me see if I can briefly explain it. A lot of times you go to the polls, you see all these candidates, you don't like any of them. But you got to pick out, well, this person would be the lesser evil, so you vote for them. But with the negative vote, instead you could vote against the person you dislike the most.
Negative 10 points.
Then the negative vote would cancel the positive vote. And then if you get no candidate for the positive vote, well, you got to just throw them out and have a new election. I know a lot of people, I don't know, they think this is crazy, but to me it seems like it would do a lot of good.
So that works by, you have one vote, you can either vote positive or negative, and you can
Right,
vote
well, one person, one vote, but you can vote positive or negative on candidate.
That's interesting.
Somehow that's moving away from the idea of more participation. The bidder get to go against.
More of a comment.
That's why compulsory voting and education based on that will be the best. Probably never get there in the United States. Because people think you're challenging your individual rights when you act that you should vote.
It'd be interesting to see how Australia got that done.
I think they started. I think it was just the idea.
I just want to say a lot of you who are here are very talented and able people. I know a lot of people here. Have you ever thought of running for office? I know it's you know, it is something to really seriously consider doing. Please think of it.
Well, yeah, that's the perfect segue. I mean, that's what I want to encourage people to think about more. I mean, when we talk about voter participation and how many people vote, to me that's very much a secondary issue. I'm more, if you have a completely uninformed person who goes to vote because they might win a prize, I don't think that helps. And, always thinking about the negative voting against one. I think that instant runoff kind of does that, some of that in a way, if we can pick for a second. But most importantly, and this goes to who gets elected as well as voter participation, we need more candidates.
Yeah.
There are so many instances right here in Hilo where someone didn't even have a single opponent, not one. Doesn't matter how much money you spend, you'd at least have a forum and a platform, and if someone didn't like the incumbent, at least they have a choice, which they don't have right now. There's a certain state legislator who got the biggest fine in state ethics commission history this year, and no one was running against him. He would have lost if John Smith would put his name on the ballot. He would have lost, and no one was running against him. So, and I do want to commend, as Councilmember Illigan says, I didn't even realize you were here. It was in 2012 when Gregor was elected. I think a majority of the council was elected who did public financing, so it completely changed county council. But the idea is how do we bring that back is we got to overcome our hidden enemies and the kinds of things you guys are working on. Because we need to pass a law statewide to even allow that. There's many people who don't want that. But as Noelle said, there's people in this room who are passionate and knowledgeable. Put your name on the ballot next year. And I'm serious.
Thank you very much. And it is 8 o'clock.
Just candidate who didn't even have anyone running against him was able to get public financing. So I think that should be changed. That was the chair of the council. 2 years ago. Yoshimoto, yeah. He accessed public financing, and he didn't have anyone running against him. Running against someone?
Are you certain? Because I thought that the program called for people in an election, candidates in an election who were opposed.
That's my memory of it. I might be wrong.
Primary.
Petition for clean elections. Because I hope you all check, yes, you are to be reachable. Because we should put you all on a committee so we can have all kinds of imaginative ideas, whether paying people to do things or starting campaigns of one sort or another, but we need to get some sort going.
I second that notion. Definitely sign the clean elections ballot, petition rather. Thanks so much for coming, everybody. Appreciate it.